Hello, 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 everybody. My name is Stephen Mead here with Domicile Real Estate. This is our Southern California housing market update for March 30th, 2021. And why am I wearing aviator sunglasses for this week's video? It is because our market is stalling, but not the way you think. And I'm going to go into that in a second. One of the things that you'll notice in the market is that each week we are in a very dynamic market that changes week to week. And a lot of times, and I've talked about this like probably 100 times before, we all think that markets move in this very smooth graph just like this. They don't. The market will often take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And what that means is that, if you're someone who's watching the market, you're really paying attention to where things are, there's some unique opportunities, right? Like you might know that certain weeks it's easier to buy a house than others. Certain weeks there's less competition in certain price ranges than others. And sometimes you can use that data. But what it also means is that if you really don't like the situation you're in, it will probably be a little bit different next week. So I'm going to jump into the stats and I'm going to explain what I mean by our market is stalling. So here we go. Let me bring up the screen share and I can get that out for you guys here. Let's see. There we are. So first piece of evidence, our market is stalling. And here's the trick. It isn't buyers that are stalling. It is not market demand that is stalling. It is the supply of homes into the marketplace. And so if you look here, remember our blue line is our under $1 million of total active listings, and our red line is $1 to $2 million. If you look here, we actually saw a trend of inventory getting better in both of these categories. Maybe not better by a huge amount, but better by a little bit. And look what's happened in the last week. Both of our market segments have retreated, meaning inventory has started to drop again. There are fewer active listings in both of these groups than there were last week. So that's evidence number one that our inventory and our new listings on the market are actually stalling. Here's our last 14 days of new listings. And really, this is the graph that pretty much says it all right here. So I'm going to focus your attention. So what this graph shows us is how many new listings came on the market in the last 14 days, under $1 million and between $1 and $2 million. And I think what's really interesting to note here is we saw a little bit of a turn maybe last week, but look what happened between the past 7 days. Look at how this number has moved down. And what's interesting is if you look here, since the beginning of the year, we haven't seen at any point has the number of new listings hitting the market dropped by this much week over week. And I think that really says something about the kind of market that we're in. Sellers are not putting their homes on the market in the numbers we expect. Normally, March is a huge month for new listings and new inventory in our market. What you normally see is this graph here looks exactly like this, except what should have happened is it should have continued just like this. And we would have been here in terms of our new listings, not down here. And you can actually see that to a lesser degree in our 1 to 2 million category, right? That number should be over somewhere like this, but it's not. Instead, it's all the way down here. Now, to give you a reference point of what that means, that is actually 10, 20, maybe even 25% less active or less incoming listings than we would normally have this time of year in the spring. And really, that's going to dictate a lot of market dynamics. We have a couple of problems in our market. I'm going to go screen share here. If you are a seller, this is really great news. I think last week we were talking, maybe your run of sort of this hyper competitive market is over. This week shows that no, it is definitely not over just yet. So if you are a seller, it is absolutely still a great time to put your house in the market. You will find very little competition with other listings in the marketplace. I think if you're a buyer, right, this is a more complicated scenario. We have a bunch of things that are sort of conspiring against you. Number one is that interest rates, even though they have risen, they are still historically incredibly low. And we'll get to this in a later graph, but basically it means the median payment on a median priced home is still very, very affordable as referenced historically. So it's important to take that under consideration. The second thing is this limited inventory really is just going to make that market a bit crazy out there. It's going to make it very competitive. It means that for every listing that comes in the market, there are 10 or 20 shoppers out there looking for those listings in most segments. There are some price and geographic segments that are just brutal, where you are seeing 30, 40 listings on each house. And I think that the numbers this week say this is likely to continue, at least in the immediate future, until we can see either some relief by the fact that prices and or interest rates go up and they ease demand, or we actually see an influx of inventory, which is what I want to have happen, more inventory to sort of balance the market out. Anyhow, let's jump back in with our numbers and our stats. So if this is our new listings in the last 14 days, this is our new escrows. And this is really kind of an interesting graph because I think something is happening here. I just mentioned that there are really two ways to sort of ease the constraints on our market. Number one is that prices, or in reality payments, go up to the point where it eases demand. And the second is that more inventory comes into the market. If you look here in our under $1 million category, you actually see that our new escrows dropped, which is indicative of a drop in demand, not a very big drop, but at least a little bit of a drop. And I think that's what might be happening. But what I find interesting is look where we are down here in our $1 to $2 million category. This hasn't slipped at all. In fact, this has been almost very steady for the last month and hasn't dropped at all. So we have a situation where the number of new listings coming to the market is dropping and the number of people buying houses is not. So I don't know how much of this drop in demand for under 1 million is just that there are no houses to buy, and how much of this drop is in fact seeing demand waning a little bit. I think there might be a little bit of reduced demand due to payment levels increasing. That might explain why we're seeing this drop in the under $1 million category and not so much in the 1 to 2. Under $1 million buyers tend to be more interest rate and price sensitive. So if we reconcile our supply and demand together, we come up with our absorption rate. This is sort of our quick and dirty, how competitive is our market? And while it looked like we had a nice downward trend happening here, unfortunately, we see this rising back up. We are well, I think we're right at about that 90% mark, which is a hyper competitive market for under $1 million. And we are definitely over 80% in our $1 to $2 million category, meaning it is also a very competitive market. I think it's important to note, if you look back here in these histories, this is the new normal. I don't see us entering a period where it's not multiple offers anytime soon. I just think that number of offers might change. For example, you might be one of 5 offers instead of one of 10 or one of 20 offers. Here's our closed prices. And, this sort of mirrors, I think, some of those comments about price sensitivity, right? If you look at our 25th percentile of the market, that would be like our entry level market here in blue. You see that those prices still tempered. Now, it's important to remember these are prices from 1 month ago, 4 to 6 weeks ago. Our median prices have a slight increase in upward trend. And boy, look at our 75th percentile. Way less variation, and those prices continue to rise. I think those people in that category are less price sensitive. So I don't know how much is going to come into play. I think demand has to reduce a lot to see big changes in prices, because I feel like even if we get to a point in our low end market where we're seeing that there's only 2 buyers for every house instead of 5, that's still 2 buyers for every house, and we have an inventory shortage. This is one of my favorite new graphs that we started doing this year. It is our percent still active after 14 days. So we look at all the new listings that came on the market in the last 14 days, and we look at how many of those are still active or coming soon status in the MLS. And the way to read this graph is not the absolute numbers, but it's how it changed versus last week. So if you look, we had a slight downward change in our under 1 million, meaning that market got slightly more competitive, and a large downward change in our 1 to 2 million market. So that means we are almost at a level where we were a month ago, reaching a new low, meaning a new competitive level of that $1 to $2 million market. We have our list to close ratio, and in weeks past, we've actually had to readjust this graph. And the reason why we had to readjust this graph is because we ran out of room. We had previously capped this at 102%, but look at what has happened in that last week. Again, this is based on closed data, which is 4 to 6 weeks old. But if you look at this trend over time, this shows that buyers are getting more and more aggressive on their offers versus the list price of a home. So, whenever we have a client ask us about writing offers well below list price, generally speaking, that is not happening very often. Typically, buyers will be paying a minimum of list price, and on average, they will actually be paying close to 103% of list price on entry level under $1 million properties. Just to put that in perspective, that means that on average, if you see a home for $800,000, it will take $824,000 to get that property on average. That means sometimes you might be able to do it for less, but there are other times you will have to spend more than 3% above list price in order to get that property. And I actually don't see any signs of this number changing. Anecdotally, what I'm hearing in the market right now is that this is in fact accelerating. And the reality is, I wouldn't be surprised to see our average number in the coming weeks hit 104% of list price as some of the deals that are being negotiated right now actually come to fruition and end up closing. Moving on, we have our days on market for new contracts. And we actually had to adjust this again downward in our graph in order to see the new low numbers. And the real story here is that this has been a pretty steady decline since the end of last year. We've kind of settled out here on our under 1 million at 19 days on market. But look at what's happened in $1 to $2 million. We are about to hit the same number. Like, I think these graphs may actually get close and end up meeting at some point. We are in the mid 20 days for $1 to $2 million listings. One thing I also forget to always mention with this graph is that in our MLS system, even if a property is marked accepting backup offers, that days on market statistic continues to accrue. So the reality is our days into escrow number is actually even quite a bit lower. I think it might actually be less than 10 days for our under 1 million, and it may even be less than or fewer than 20 days for our $1 to $2 million. Now, finally, the graph that we want to look at here is this. It's our affordability graph. And again, what we've done is we've indexed this back to June of 2018. So we set that number as sort of our baseline, our 100% figure. And what this graph shows us is the payment on a median priced home less than 2018 prices, or is it higher than 2018 levels? And this, of course, incorporates two components: our current median home price, and secondly, prevailing interest rates. So if we look at this, we've actually hit a new high at 110%. Now, that might sound bad, but the reality is, if in 3 years we have only moved 10% in terms of moving up in price, that pretty much just means inflation and that prices really haven't changed. So for those of you who have a feeling like you've missed the boat and that things are way worse affordability-wise now than they were 3 years ago, that is actually not true. When you factor in inflation, we are in fact right about where we expected to be, or right where you would expect to be after 3 years of time. So, I hope this was helpful. I'm going to take my glasses off here. This is a market really where I'm very surprised to see that our new inventory coming into the market is stalling out. And I think that's particularly troubling for buyers in the long run, because that really is the only good solution to sort of our market in equilibrium. Like right now, we have a market that is incredibly out of balance, right? We have sellers having just tons of leverage out there and buyers having very little. There are way fewer sellers than there are buyers And that results in there being multiple buyers for every listing that comes onto the market. I think that breeds kind of people making poor choices on what home they buy. I think that leads to a lot of things that aren't necessarily a great market condition. However, that is the market that we're in. And of course, if you're a buyer, your fear is that while affordability now, even factoring in inflation, is about where we were 3 years ago, if prices continue to rise and or interest rates rise, we can see a situation where it's going to get worse for you before it would get any better. And that means even if it gets better after it gets worse, it still might be worse than it is right now. So I mean, I think if you're a buyer in the marketplace, my advice to you is, I don't think you want to be afraid of where the market is. I think it's one of those things, it's going to be rough to get an offer accepted in a market like this, but ultimately worth it. So I think it's worth putting in the time and the energy, and sort of playing that mental game. If you are a seller and you are watching this, well, the party continues for you, right? And it means even if you have a property that isn't perfect, even if you have a property that is unusual or otherwise difficult to sell, now is your time to put a property like that on the market. You will have more eyeballs in your direction than ever before because you have such limited competition. And there are buyers out there who will say, I want a house, any house, and I don't really care which one, and that are frustrated and may make poor choices. If you have a home, for a seller, that's a great situation. Buyers, not so much, but for a seller, I think that's great. And like I said, if you're a buyer, I don't necessarily think things are going to get a lot better for you if you wait. And in fact, I think things will probably get a little bit worse for you if you wait. Anyhow, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you're watching on YouTube. As usual, questions, comments, we love them. Don't feel shy about asking. And if you are a home buyer or a home seller in the Southern California market, especially Los Angeles and Orange counties, do not hesitate to reach out if you'd like to work with us. We would definitely like to work with you. Anyhow, we will see you next time.